Hi there, and welcome to another success story. And as everyone knows, I always start with a question straight away. And I've got such an amazing guest with me. I can't wait to ask this question, which is, hey, Robert, how did you become Keto Savage?
Hey, thanks for having me, man. So I became Keto Savage kind of by accident, I guess you could say. I started bodybuilding when I was a junior in high school. I weighed 115 pounds. I was just a scrawny guy in school, and I wanted to build mass, get confident with the ladies, I guess. I don't know. And I bulked up to 230 pounds, and that's not a really good look for me. I'm only 5'7", so I was pretty hefty. And I did my first bodybuilding competition in college as a sophomore. I lost 80 pounds in 12 weeks, developed a bunch of eating disorders, and it was a really slippery slope for me from there on for several years to follow. And I realized there had to be something better, nutritionally speaking, had to be something more sustainable, something that I could do without feeling, this negative relationship with food. And I started doing what was at the time keto. It was actually called carbohydrate backloading, developed by John Kiefer. So it's basically keto during the day, then a bunch of carbs at night. And I noticed that I felt better without the carbs. So I just phased out the carbs, and lo and behold, that was pretty much keto. This was back in 2015, so there wasn't really any, websites or books or podcasts about keto. So I didn't really know what it was I was doing, but I felt great doing it and improved my relationship with food, stuck with it, actually competed in 2017 with this ketogenic diet. And that's when I earned my pro card status and got the leanest I'd ever gotten before, all while following a pretty sustainable diet for me. And when I got that pro card, that's when I realized that there was something to this ketogenic diet and lifestyle. It was working for me. It was working for other people. And I just pretty much developed the moniker Keto Savage and have stuck with it ever since. And it's since become what I hope to be, something that inspires others to, embody what they can do from a nutritional standpoint, from a performance standpoint, and then also just, inspire them to be the very best that they can be and kind of tap into their own innate inner savagery.
That's brilliant. I mean, I find you a very fascinating person, and this is going to be a very different interview because I have a lot of clients that have mentioned you, they've referenced you, and I'll be honest, I didn't know who you were until they started talking to me about you, and I looked you up, and I'm very impressed with everything you're doing. One of the things that strikes me is I'm a personal trainer. I've trained an Olympic athlete and all that sort of stuff. And people come to me and I always talk about nutrition first. Mm-hmm. And I won't train anyone unless they talk about nutrition and get that sorted first. And I think that's something I've noticed about you, because although you do exercise and you lift heavy things and, work out in the gym, as I did, I've done a bodybuilding show once, you really go on about nutrition. Do you think that nutrition is the most important thing when it comes to bodybuilding?
It's hard to say. Like, people want to have it broken down into like a mathematical equation, like, this plus this equals this. And a lot of people say, it's 90% nutrition, 10% training. And within the scope of bodybuilding, I like to say it's 100% of each. Like, you have to have the nutrition, but you also have to have the training. Like, if you have the most dialed in nutrition, yeah, you'll probably live longer. You'll have a better health span for sure, but you're not going to look like a bodybuilder. So I think they're both very, very important. But for me personally, I really try to emphasize and focus on the nutrition, because even if you don't know how to train with proper technique, if you're going in the gym and you're hustling, you're lifting with intensity, you're lifting with intentionality, you're gonna have a stimulus that's subjected to your body there, and you're gonna have a response to that. But if you are haphazard with your nutrition, you're gonna massively short circuit your potential. So I think really doubling down on nutrition, building those proper foundational concepts at the get-go is going to just bode well for overall success. So I really try and focus on nutrition.
And I think, as your name implies, you're a keto savage, you're into the keto. Do you get much pushback with people that say you've got to have carbs, and how do you come back to them?
I definitely did in the beginning. And then I just started looking better than all they did, which is going to sound really egotistical, but I mean, when I compete, I'm typically the leanest person on the stage, and I just am able to do so while eating really great foods. Like, typically, as the scene, post or with the prep, with the competition prep, you're like eating rice cakes backstage. You're eating, chicken and rice and like very bland foods. It's just not sustainable. It certainly wasn't for me. And I'm typically eating very high dietary fat, moderate protein, very low carbs, but it's all like nutritious foods, like it's eggs and steaks and things that I would want to eat anyway. So I don't have to sacrifice all these foods that I enjoy throughout my competition prep. And if I'm able to come to stage oftentimes leaner than these other competitors, they start asking what it is I'm doing, what it is that I'm doing that's working so well. And I've just kind of gained confidence with it, with the protocol that I'm doing. And then I've built confidence in other people that are not doing the protocol, but they understand that it's working for me, obviously.
Yeah, and I love the fact you snuck in there that, you know, bodybuilding and health are two different things. Mm-hmm. So could you expand on what you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think so within the scope of bodybuilding, you have natural bodybuilding, which is what I compete in, and then you have untested bodybuilding, which is oftentimes a chemistry set of people taking a lot of performance enhancing drugs. And for me, I got into it to be the best that I could be in a healthy manner. So going the route of the performance enhancing drugs never really appealed to me. I wanted to just see what my body's capable of naturally. And if you do natural bodybuilding with a well-formulated diet and you're training in a way that is, you know, not risking you unnecessarily for injury, then I truly believe it is great from a health and longevity standpoint. Like it's just all the right things are there to give one a better health span. But you could certainly take it to an unnecessary extreme. And when you take bodybuilding, the latter part of the prep, like when you get down to sub 5% body fat, that's not really healthy by any stretch of the imagination. That's a very finite period of time. But all in all, apart from that very finite period of time, I think it's a very healthy sport that is oftentimes, I can kind of consider it the fountain of youth. Like if you're training properly, you have your nutrition dialed in, you're resting adequately, like you're doing everything you can to set yourself up for long-term success.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned about the 5% body fat, because that's just not sustainable. But are you pretty lean all the year round?
Yeah, so like right now, my prep actually starts for this year in a week. So right now is my off season walking around weight. I'm 180 pounds, and right now I'm at about 15% body fat, which is about as high as I'll get in a building phase. And my 15% body fat looks pretty different. Like I still have very visible abs and everything at 15% body fat because I have the underlying muscle definition, you know, and symmetry and shape there. But I think it's very important to have that, you know, sustainability factor into it. And I would not be able to sustain 5% body fat year round. And I wouldn't want to either. Like that's going to inhibit my ability to build more lean tissue. And certainly not going to be enjoyable from a nutrient standpoint. So I definitely think, you know, operating at a higher percent body fat year round is key.
And you said you had pushback at the beginning, but you now have a lot more respect and people can see the results. And I don't think that was you being big-headed when you said you look better, because I think you won competitions, so you can say it. What does your training look like then? I mean, do you do a lot of volume? Do you use gym? What do you do, basically?
Yeah, so it's funny. I try and mix it up quite a bit, but really and truly, my training is pretty old school. Like I don't do a whole lot of I see the basics. I like a lot of heavy primary compound movements. I like my squats, deadlift, bench press. The vast majority of my lifting career has been with a body part specific split, like a standard, you know, chest day, back day, arm day. I've actually been experimenting with a full body splits for the past 6 months, probably. And I've actually really enjoyed that. I was always pretty skeptical of full body splits, but I've been traveling quite a bit lately. And the beauty of a full body split is that each muscle is getting targeted every single day. So if I'm gone on Friday for, you know, an event or something, it's not like that's an entire muscle group that I'm missing out on if I were doing a full body or a body part split. With the full body, everything's getting targeted every time I train. So it's increasing my overall training frequency for a given body part. And I think my body's responded pretty well to that.
And do you work out fasted?
Usually I work out fasted. I'll typically train at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I'll wake up at 3. I'll have like a tea with some heavy cream or something in it, but that's the extent of my breaking of the fast prior to the training. And I'll train at 6 for an hour and a half or so. And then I'll have my first meal typically around 10 or 11.
And what is your first meal normally?
Normally it is a keto brick for a fat source. There's 90 grams of fat in most flavors of that. And I'll have a protein source with that. So like today I had about a pound of chicken thighs. Tomorrow I'm going to have about a pound of pork loin. Sometimes it's like an 80-20 ground beef burger, but it's pretty much always a keto brick with a quality protein source.
Yeah, now that's great advice, because I always preach about protein isolates, and really you need fat with it, because if you're making your muscles bigger, you need bigger membrane, so you need some fat and you need some bile to digest the amino acids. And I love that little, you snuck in the keto bricks there, which I'm very impressed with. Again, that's something I hear a lot of, and I think a lot of people love them. So yeah, what made you get into the keto bricks? Because that's pretty fascinating.
Yes, kind of a funny story. Like, it was never meant to be a product that I produced and sold for, money or anything. It was honestly my own desire to scratch my own itch. When I was doing my 2017 competition prep, I wanted a way to streamline my meal prep and hit my macro targets for the day easily, and just honestly make things more simple. So I started building out these different products just to try and see if I can make something work for my own personal consumption. And then the brick was born, and I was documenting that prep on my YouTube channel. And, I'd showcased like a full day of eating video, like what I was eating. So I'd show people this, first generation brick that I was eating, and people kept asking about it. Hey, what is it? What's the recipe? Where can I buy it? And I just kind of wrote it off. It's like, it's nothing. It's something I'm working on. And then my mom, of all people, was like, you can get a lot of people asking about this brick. You ought to like make it a product or something. And I'm like, okay. So my girlfriend at the time, wife now, we rolled up our sleeves and learned about making a food product business. And it's just really grown since then. So it all kind of happened organically.
That's cool. We can't get them in the UK. Well, we can, but we need to take out an extra loan just to pay for the shipping at the moment, which we discussed before the show started. So I'd love to know your opinion on calories, actually. Do you have any strong opinions?
Hot topic, man. I like that. So calories, I think, it's honestly how people define it. So like, I'll talk with somebody, like I talked to Bart K the other day. I had him on the podcast, and I don't know if you know much about Bart K, but he is vehemently opposed to the concept of calories because it's impossible to accurately track intake and expenditure, which I agree with. Like, nobody's taking their food and running it through a bomb calorimeter, and we're not a closed loop system, so that would be rather inaccurate anyways. But at the same time, the notion that calories don't matter and it's all about hormones and the amount of one's consumption is irrelevant, I think, is also not the case. Like, when I'm in a competition prep, the main thing I'm manipulating is my total intake for the day. I'll titrate it up, I'll titrate it down, I'll change my macronutrient distribution, but I'm really changing my overall intake. So the amount of my consumption is very key to changing my body's composition. Now, do I think it's as simplified as, calories in, calories out, eat more or eat less, move more? I think that's a drastic oversimplification that oftentimes doesn't work for people either. But I definitely do believe that one's total intake has an impact on one's composition for sure.
Yeah. I'd love to talk to you about calories, because I'm a person that talks more about mass. I'm not a believer in
mass. Like, I like that definition too. Like, when I'm looking at calories, I'm not really fixating on the calorie load. I'm mostly focused on what the macronutrient gram distribution of protein grams, fat grams, things of that nature. And you could derive mass from those numbers. So if I could do everything that I do just looking at mass.
Brilliant. Yes, that's good. And I'll send you a video. I did a 4-minute video about calories, and then you can get me back on your podcast and rip it apart if you want. But that's really good. So how did you get into training other people?
So honestly, this is a long story, but I was broke, for lack of a better word. After I graduated college, I was a manager at a railroad. So I moved to Washington State, all the way away from my family, from everything I knew, to be a manager at a railroad. And I did that for 3 years, hated it. It was corporate world, did not like it at all. That's when I was also going through all my disordered eating tendencies. And one day I just had a leveling with myself. And I'm like, look, I'm not passionate about this life. This is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. What am I passionate about? What am I good at? Where can I add more value in the world? And I'm very passionate about nutrition. I had recently discovered the ketogenic diet and had a profound benefit from that. And I loved training with people and just like interacting with people at the gym. So I decided I'm just going to be a trainer. And then the rest is history from there. I just built a website, wrote a book, learned how to start a podcast, make a YouTube channel, create an Instagram account, and started putting out all this content. And it was very slow to grow, but I was offering something that was unique, and it did grow. And now I work with people all over the world, and I'm incredibly grateful for it.
Do you think it was the keto part that was unique?
I definitely feel like I timed things not intentionally, but I think I came into that market at the right time because I started coaching in 2016. I've been doing keto since 2015. I started coaching at 2016, and I think keto reached its zenith according to Google Trends, I think in 2017. So I was really on the forefront of that movement, and because I started putting out content, I was in the spotlight when people were starting to Google these things and see these things. So I think from a timing standpoint, I certainly caught that at the right time.
And did it impact on your training and your own competition because it was taking up so much time?
The like working with people as a coach.
Yeah.
I mean, in the very beginning, I had a ton of, like, in the very beginning, I had no clients, but then once I started gaining some momentum, I had quite a few clients, and that's all I did. This was before Keto Brick became a thing. So it was all just me one-on-one. And at one point I had like 100 clients, and that was just way too much for me to do, even though that was all that I was doing. Like I have a very high touch point with all my clientele. Like I message them all every single day. I'm updating their macros every single week. And for me, doing that with 100 clients was just hard for me to bear at the level of intensity that I wanted to. So I've intentionally not made that my primary focus. Now I'm still working with people one-on-one. I probably always will, because I think working with people one-on-one gives me the opportunity to see how people are thinking and just kind of stay on the cutting edge with where people's minds are at within the space. Plus I learn quite a bit as a coach and working with people. But right now I've got the clients, I've got the Keto Brick business. We have employees for that. I've got, several speaking engagements. I've got a lot of things, a lot of irons in the pot right now. So that's not my sole thing. I'm starting my prep next week. And if I had 100 clients right now on top of all that, I'd probably go crazy. So not sustainable.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, your story is fascinating. I find it very inspirational, to be honest. So when you have your clients, are they all online now, or do you actually go out to train with them?
They're pretty much all online. I pretty much started all online from the very beginning. That said, I'll oftentimes train at a few local gyms just to mix things up, change up my own scenery, use different equipment, and in going to different gyms, I'll meet people and we'll just start a conversation, and they'll oftentimes want to work with me one-on-one. And in that setting, since I'm there training with them anyways, then I'll help them with form and technique. Like I've got a few clients at a local gym here. I'm not going there specifically to work with them on training technique because they all pretty much know how to train. I'm working with their nutrition and then training alongside them as we train.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question I didn't warn you about because it's only just popped into my head. What about your own motivation? Do you ever get to the point where you think, I've gone off the training? Do you ever go off the boil, so to speak?
I don't ever really deviate from the training. Like the longest time that I've ever gone without training is probably about, I don't think I've ever gone more than a week. I don't think since I started training, I've gone more than a week without training. For me, training is like my firm footing. If my life is in utter chaos, but I have at least my training that's consistent and my nutrition, I've got a solid foothold in which I can crawl out of the hell that I find myself in at the moment. So having those two things dialed in pretty much on point has been really therapeutic for me.
What about clients? Do you find that you have some clients that maybe just struggle and they're self-sabotaging, those sort of things?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, I think any coach that's worked with clients, especially in their nutritional realm, when you're a nutrition coach, and you can attest to this too, you're also like you're a part-time nutrition coach, but you're also like a part-time therapist. Like they come to you with all of their life problems and concerns, which I like. I like being able to connect with people on a personal level because it's all holistic in nature. Like everything has to work in unison for it to truly work. But I feel like a lot of people, depending on what their desires and intentions and driving motivating factors are, like oftentimes their why is not strong enough, and they'll oftentimes deviate from their training or from their nutrition. That said, I've got certain clients that are also competitive athletes, and they're bulldog mentality towards a goal. They don't deviate at all, which I can really respect and appreciate because I'm similar in that nature. So it's like we're two kindred spirits in that regard. But when I have clients that do deviate, it doesn't really do me any good to bash them unnecessarily, because more often than not, they're harder on themselves than I would be on them. But just trying to bring them back, recenter them, and get them back on track.
Yeah, cool. And going to the other end of the spectrum, do you have problems with people that overtrain?
I do have a few. I've had a few clients. Oftentimes, these are competitors as well. They'll especially post competition. Like when people compete, they're like at the apex of their training intensity. They're at the apex of their macronutrient intake, from a deficit standpoint, and they're the leanest they've ever been, and they want to hold on to that conditioning because they've worked so hard for it. And it's hard for them sometimes to transition into more of a reverse dieting phase and increase their intake, actually intentionally decrease their output. So kind of walking them through that can sometimes be a bit tricky, but they only have a lot to gain from it. So, I'll just kind of explain that to them, and they'll oftentimes see the light on the other side and do so.
Yeah, I can relate to that because as a trainer, I've had to pull back some people because they're starting to get injured because they train too much. I had one guy who was in his 50s and overweight and smoked and real wreck, basically, health-wise. And within a year, he was in the top 20% marathon running. He was an animal, really. It was really good. But then he started to get injured, and I kept saying to him, it's great where we've got you from where you were to where you are now, but you're training too much, and I found it very difficult to cut that back. And but then I tapped into my own experience, which I've never met. I don't think I've ever said this live, but when I did my bodybuilding show, I'd never been to America, by the way. I was in my 20s, and I booked to go to Gold's Gym the next day, to fly out to America and go and train in Gold's Gym the day after my show. And there's a picture of me on the beach with my abs and looking really cut. And I walked into Gold's Gym and managed to train with Sean Ray, the amazing bodybuilder. And I was so humbled because I was natural, and I would imagine Sean probably wasn't. But anyway, it's huge, very, very inspirational. And I just wanted to look like that for the rest of my life. I just felt it was so great, but it was such hard work. And as you said, that's why I picked up on the health span thing. Not really healthy to be that lean. But I totally get wanting to look like that forever. But as soon as you eat something, you start getting puffy again, and away you go.
There's so much benefit to having the yin yang relationship with it, though. Like, you don't want to be that lean forever, but you also don't want to never get that lean. Like, maybe not necessarily that lean, but to some extent leaner. And I think if you're able to juggle those and cycle through those phases in a healthy manner, that's where the sweet spot lies.
Okay, so you said you're an open book, so I'm going to test you now. Have you ever been tempted to juice?
Maybe in the very beginning, never to the extent of me actually acting on it. But I think everybody, when they first start working out, they just want to be the very best they can be. They start taking more of an interest in supplements. They start talking about creatine and protein powders and pre-workouts, and then that just progresses from there. But for me, like, once I found the sport of natural bodybuilding, that provided the outlet for me. Like, if there was no such thing as natural bodybuilding, it'd be much more tempting to go the route to performance-enhancing drugs. But since there isn't a legitimate sanctioned realm for competing naturally, like that gets me more exciting. It's unfortunate that natural bodybuilding doesn't have near the notoriety that standard bodybuilding does. People want to see the freaks, and you're not going to see the freaks at 180 pounds when you can see them at 300 pounds because they're taking stuff. But I think since there is that sanctioned event for natural athletes, I really just want to be the very best I can be in that realm.
Yeah. And I think looking at your promotional material, I mean, to me, you look pretty awesome. So yeah, I can imagine being quite happy at that stage. I mean, I think when I look at my picture from my bodybuilding show, I was a long way off where you are. So I think you've shown to me that you can be natural and actually go a lot further. My training partner ended up competing for Mr. England as a natural. So, I could see firsthand, but also people in the gym there were, on performance enhancing drugs, and they did look amazing. So,
the guys that compete naturally are just huge, man. Like, I have no idea how some of these natural bodybuilders, there must be something in the water, but they just are massive. I'm not near the biggest guy in the natural realm by any means, but I can hope to be the leanest because I feel like I've got a competitive edge there, but I'll never be the biggest.
Yeah, and I think strength and actual athletic ability in the natural bodybuilders was very pronounced, and I think some of the guys that looked massive weren't particularly strong. So anyway, I don't want to get too nuanced about that. But you mentioned protein powder, so I'd love you to touch on that. What are your views on post and pre-workout shakes and those sort of things?
I honestly don't ever use them. I used to way back in the day when I was following more of a traditional bro diet approach to nutrition. But since I went keto, I honestly never consume protein shakes pre and post workout. My whole philosophy with protein around workout nutrition is as long as you're consuming ample protein throughout the day, then you should be good to go. From a muscle protein synthesis standpoint, most of the research points that, at least 2 feedings a day are going to be better from a muscle, generating more growth. And I'll do that whenever I'm in a building phase. When I'm in a strict deficit for a prep, I'll oftentimes switch to an OMAD approach. But at that point, my goal is not really to build more muscle so much as it is to preserve the tissue that I've already got. So I'm not really worried about adding more muscle at that point.
And what about this thing that's going around that you can only have 30 grams of protein per meal? What are your views on that?
Yeah, I would definitely be failing by those standards because there oftentimes will have 100 grams of protein per meal. So yeah, I'm not really worried about that. There's just a lot of oversimplification in the nutritional realm in its totality. They'll have like a mouse study that points to X, Y, or Z, and then everybody hangs their hat on that. For me, it's like, okay, what is most sustainable? What's been proven to work time and time again? And just honestly doubling down the consistency component. If you take all these studies and throw them out the window, but just are very consistent with something that is pretty much fundamentally true, then you're likely going to see tremendous success.
Yeah, I mean, I often quote a study where they've looked at 100 grams of protein per meal, and they've also looked at 20 and 40. And it's, most of them conclude actually there seems to be no upper limit to protein consumption. The other thing, it always makes me laugh when they talk about mouse studies. If you're looking at the gym, they cannot get a mouse to do a bench press. So, it's not a particularly good study if they're looking at a mouse. That's what I always say. I think I'd like to ask you about a few other things, because I know we're talking about training, bodybuilding, and that is your niche. But what about other things like, for instance, protein sparing modified fasting? Because some people seem to turn to that for cutting. Do you have any particular views on that protocol?
I'm not a fan of protein sparing modified fast. I've spoken out about them quite a few times. And the main reason I'm not a fan is because it's a crash diet in and of itself. I mean, when you look at the definition of a protein sparing modified fast, it's oftentimes prescribed as having incredibly high protein, very, very low dietary fat, very low carbohydrates for days on end. And that's just not sustainable. It's not healthy. It's not healthy from a hormonal standpoint or from a metabolic standpoint. Oftentimes the nutritional recommendations using caloric, allotments are like for 600 calories a day for a full-grown adult. I've got a 10-month-old son, and he eats more than 600 calories a day. So if a full-grown adult that's like moving around and training is also going to be consuming 600 calories a day, it's just not optimal from any stretch of the imagination from a performance standpoint. So I'm definitely not a fan.
I mean, yeah, I'm not a fan either. I do have a video on my YouTube channel which talks about the pros and cons, because I like to be balanced, but personally, it's not for me. I don't believe when you fast, if you have body fat on you, your body is stupid enough to start eating into your muscle. I just don't see that myself. Do you have clients that come to you just not for training, but just for body recomposition?
Yeah. So several of my clients are not competing in a bodybuilding competition. They just simply want to improve their composition. They want to get healthier. Many of my clients are females that have needed to reverse diet for quite some time, but have finally allowed themselves to go through a reverse diet, which is great. So I see that a lot with both males and females, but specifically females. They've just chronically underfed themselves for far too long, and their body would benefit hormonally and metabolically from going through a period of reverse dieting. So I've tried to speak out quite a bit about the importance of that. So they'll come to me for that.
Yeah. So just for my listeners who maybe haven't heard of a reverse diet, would you like to just explain what that is?
Yeah, so quite simply, it's basically the reverse of dieting. So like when you think of dieting, you're typically dropping down your caloric intake, dropping down your overall consumption, trying to get leaner, lose body fats. With the reverse diets, what goes down must come up, so to speak. So if you take your consumption down drastically, you can't sustain that very low intake for too long without it wreaking havoc on your metabolism, because your metabolism adapts, and also your hormonal health. So simply and strategically titrating that intake back up to a more sustainable intake over time in a way that minimizes body fat gain is pretty much a reverse diet.
Yeah, that's great. And I think it is self-evident from the name, but I just thought we'd clarify, because there are some people out there that will pick me up on not asking that question. And do you still get the same buzz from training clients that you did when you first started?
Well, keto is not quite in the limelight like it was back in 2017. So I feel like it's dropped off in that sense of the word. But at the same time, there's an ever-growing demographic of people that are learning about keto, that are wanting to dive into it deeper. And honestly, I feel sorry for them. There's so much information out there right now that seems to conflict with one another. Like when I first started keto back in 2015, there wasn't really that much information. So whenever there was anything that came out, you could just kind of dissect it and dive deep into it. Now there's just so much information online that somebody that's just now getting into the space, like I don't even know where they would turn. So for me, I've tried to go very ultra niche with my business, my branding, my coaching style, and really trying to cater towards those that are performance athletes, but also wanting to just adhere to the diet in a very strict way. I feel like a lot of people want a metabolic flexibility approach in which they're eating a little bit of everything and having a mixed diet. And I've tried to cater to those that want to make keto or carnivore pretty much their go-to long-term. I've myself been doing the diet now for 8 years strictly, and I don't feel like there's any need to deviate. So most of my clientele are also of the same mentality of just wanting to double down on it from a lifestyle standpoint.
Yeah, interesting that you said carnivore there, because I've come to you from carnivore clients who have mentioned you. So what's your views on the carnivore diet?
I'm totally for carnivore. I mean, most of what I eat is like 99% carnivore. I'll have the keto bricks, which is not carnivore, and then I'll have an occasional vegetable, but I'm not leaning on that vegetation for any type of performance benefit or any benefit, to be honest. Like I just every once in a while like the taste of, broccoli sauteed in bacon grease, or not broccoli, but Brussels sprouts, something like that, But yeah, carnivore I think is great. I feel like a lot of people find tons of benefit in carnivore. Obviously, there's been just tremendous success and momentum gained in that demographic as well. And I don't think vegetation is inherently necessary from a performance standpoint. So if you want to mitigate it and remove it entirely, there's no reason not to.
Yeah, I really like your philosophy, actually. So if there was someone listening now and they've never been carnivore, they've never been keto, but they're thinking of trying to improve their health, would you give what advice would you give them on the fence about whether they should try keto or carnivore?
Yeah, so I think the sustainability factor is very important regardless of the diet you're following. But when it comes to a ketogenic diet, when you're basically removing, like if someone's coming from a standard American diet and they're consuming a lot of carbohydrates, their body's used to using glucose for fuel. If you remove that carbohydrate source, their body has to totally shift its fuel supply, and that's not going to happen instantaneously. So for anybody that's wanting to go this route, then I encourage them to do so with the intention of at least giving it 3 to 6 months try to really get a feel for it before they make an opinion one way or the other. Because my performance from a training standpoint certainly decreased momentarily when I first started. And if that's all I was looking at, then it would be easier for me to deviate and want to go back to consuming carbohydrates. But once you actually and deeply fully adapt, your performance is not likely going to dip at all. And it can only improve from there. So I think, anybody that's wanting to get into the space, honestly, just doing so with the mentality of playing the long game with it is very important.
Do you incorporate much cardio into your plans?
I don't really do any cardio in a building phase. I will start to titrate cardio in when I'm in a competition prep. I like to think of cardio as like a minimum effective dose, minimum viable dose. So oftentimes I keep using these calories because we'll use mass. So I like to think of mass consumed and cardio as having an inverse relationship. So as my total consumption is higher, my cardio is very minimal. And then as I slowly titrate that intake down, most of my compositional changes are coming from those nutritional manipulations. But if and when my body starts to plateau from that, I can gradually titrate the cardio up slightly to give my body reason to adapt further and lose more body fat. If you're doing a ton of cardio at the onset, your body will acclimate to that load and be less likely to change if you add more, or you may not have room to add more because you're already doing 7 days a week of cardio. But if you're doing very minimal cardio, any incremental increase in cardio is going to elicit a favorable response from the body.
And what type of cardio do you normally recommend?
From a compositional change standpoint, like if I'm not worried about, being the best obstacle course racer on the world, if I'm just trying to change my body's composition, then the Stairmaster is my go-to, because it's you could standardize the Stairmaster. Level 10 is always level 10. And then I'll manipulate my training frequency on the cardio, my duration, and my intensity level. So those three variables get manipulated week to week. And then I basically just pull one of those three levers so that I'm able to do so in a sustainable fashion. But Stairmaster is definitely my go-to.
And what about people with no equipment?
No equipment, you could totally do it as well. I've actually had clients in the past. I had one client that was a police officer, and he wanted to he didn't like to go to the gym. He didn't want to interrupt his family time. He did all of his training exclusively with resistance bands and body weight. And we got him dialed in for a competition prep. He actually won first place with nothing other than resistance bands and body weight. So that was kind of an eye-opening moment for me to realize that, hey, you can make this work with whatever you've got. I don't think it's necessarily optimal, but for him, that was optimal, because that was just what worked well for his lifestyle. For me, I like the idea of having some, traditional equipment around.
Yes, I get that. So my final question, and you've been a brilliant guest, Robert, absolutely brilliant. I really enjoyed it. Very knowledgeable. I love all that. I train with the X3, and I've trained all my life, and I've done all of the stuff that you've said. Traditional gym work, bench pressing, squats, deadlifts. And I had the best results I ever had in a year at age 58 with the X3 bar. But I wonder what your view is of the X3 bar. I might have been your client, just with a sort of an outliner. But what's your opinion on it?
So I actually have the X3 bar, and I like it. Like, I think it's genius. It's very simple. Very simple, but it's effective. It's super convenient. I normally use it when I'm traveling. So if I'm traveling, I'll bring it with me. Like, I can throw it in my backpack. I can throw it in the back of the vehicle, and I can have an easy way to get those movements in with a piece of equipment that doesn't really require much space, time, or anything really. So I love it in that regard. But if I had to pick one exercise to do for the rest of my life and nothing else, then I'm probably going to opt for, a heavy barbell plate loaded deadlift or something like that. For
yes. Sure. Yeah, I do love deadlifts. Absolutely. And when I go to clients and they've got gyms at home, I don't tend to go to gyms, but if they've got a gym at home and they've got that equipment, I love demonstrating deadlift because it's great. But you can deadlift with the X3, and I'm quite happy with that. So if people wanted to contact you, what's the best way?
So all things Keto Savage. So ketosavage.com, Keto Savage on social media, and then ketobrick.com has its own website, and Keto Brick for the bricks. But yeah, everything Keto Savage.
That's great. I'm really impressed with everything that you said, and I'm just so pleased that all my clients started talking about you. I know I've been on your podcast, but that hasn't been released yet. So the final thing I just would love to ask you is, what do you think of most influencers out there that are selling just training programs and not talking about nutrition? You see it all the time on Instagram. Buy this training program to lose weight. Da, da, da. Does that annoy you, or do you think that that's okay? What do you think?
It's kind of, I feel like the consumer needs to really take a lot of ownership there. Just as like if you go to a doctor, the doctor is going to give you, hopefully, what he would think to be the best, treatment plan or protocol for improving your health. But at the end of the day, like, no one's going to care as much about your health as you, hopefully. And I feel like if you are gullible enough to believe that a training plan PDF for $10 online is going to solve all your problems, you're probably need to do a little bit more research yourself. But at the same time, it's frustrating to see influencers online prey on the ignorance of those consumers and offer them things that they know are not going to be as effective as they're marketing them as. So, someone is starting at ground zero and they just need like a basic template where they can see what proper movements are from things that they could do at their own home. That's great. That's going to get them moving. It's going to put them in the right trajectory to at least be better than they were the day before. But I think for anybody that's truly interested in helping people for the long haul and having them see sustained progress day after day, to have a conversation about training that's not also involving, improving and optimizing nutrition, it's just really not reaching the full potential. So I feel like anybody that's trying to offer training advice should also try and focus on the importance of quality nutrition as well.
If you want to see more of this type of thing or that type of thing, then just check out this video. This one. Just click it. You can subscribe if you want, but this video is really good.